Welcome back to another video. My name's Jackson. Today we're going to be going through my top 40 fantasy running backs going into this 2026 NFL fantasy season. And let's just hop right into it. Starting at rank number 40, we have Woody Marks, running back of the Houston Texans. He's coming off of a pretty strong rookie season, I thought, 703 rushing yards, even had 200 yards through the air. But now with the shift of they got David Montgomery, he's kind of taken the backseat of the running back room role. I think the way it'll play out will be David Montgomery is probably going to get a lot of the early work, a lot of the, first and second down running scheme plays that they're going to draw up for him. And then Woody Marks is probably going to be the third down guy, the pass catching back, the 2-minute drill. I do think that Woody Marks has a chance to get a lot of catches in this offense. The offensive line hasn't been great, and that leads to a lot of checkdowns, when they're getting pressured. But they did put a lot of draft capital into, the offensive line, and they even signed somebody in free agency. Braden Smith in free agency. They drafted a first-round offensive lineman from Georgia Tech. So they are trying to make improvements to the offensive line, which is good for running. Not only that, but also just in general for this offense progressing forward. Now, to get into a more of an interesting player, Jonathan Brooks, his ADP right now is 111. That's going in the early 10th round. Running back for the Carolina Panthers. He's been super injured his whole career so far. He's only appeared in a few games, but he's been a pretty explosive player, throughout his college career. And, when he even got the chance in those little to few games, he was a pretty explosive player. Coming back from 2 ACL injuries is very tough. That's why I have him ranked here. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to play out, but they did give an extension to Chuba Hubbard, so I do have him ranked behind him just for that reason, pretty much alone. But I am interested to see how to play out this year. I think it could end up being a split committee, the way it ended up being last year with Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard. I think Jonathan Brooks could easily, step into that Rico Dowdle role and, make this a split committee. Going into player number 38, we have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt with the Washington Commanders. He was an interesting player last year. I didn't think by any means, he had a terrible rookie season at all. He ended up putting about 800 yards, 8 rushing touchdowns, but only 68 through the air. So not really much of a factor. The Commanders did bring in a new offensive coordinator, David Blau. They did sign Rachaad White as well as Jerome Ford. I think this is an interesting one, a lot to do with the fact that it could end up being a split committee between, Rachaad White and JCM. And I think a lot of that is showing actually right now, a lot to do with ADP. Rachaad White's ADP is actually like 109 and JCM's is about 120. So I think the public is seeing JCM a little bit behind Rachaad White. But I do have to disagree. I think that, if they're going to be a pretty good running offense, I think he's going to be the lead back. I see Rachaad White more as the, the pass catcher, the guy out of the backfield in the 2-minute drill. And when it's third and long, I think that a lot of the early down work and, goal line work is going to go to JCM. His Vegas line is 550 yards this season, which isn't great to look at. But then again, he is my 38th ranked player. At number 37, we have Kenneth Gainwell moving from the Pittsburgh Steelers to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year on a 2-year, $14 million deal. Last year, he was pretty electric, surprisingly, not for just the Steelers alone, but for fantasy football too. He had 500 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns, but he had 73 catches for almost 500 yards through the air and 3 touchdowns to go on top of that. That's pretty cool to see. And I think that, the Bucs will probably take a step up in the offense this season. And I think that, Kenneth Gainwell has a chance to kind of repeat of what he did last year. Getting in the third down work, the 2-minute drill, catching a lot of passes out of the backfield. He's great at that. They don't have any lines out for him quite yet. It's still pretty early, but his ADP is at 92 right now, going in the middle to late 8th round. I just like the situation for him a lot. I think that the Bucs can use Kenneth Gainwell in a plethora of ways. Baker is probably going to love him a lot coming out of the backfield. And I just like Kenneth Gainwell as a shifty player. He's pretty explosive, and I think he's a great complement to Bucky Irving. On top of that, if Bucky Irving does have to miss time due to some injuries that he was dealing with last season, by the end of the season last year on the Pittsburgh Steelers, Kenneth Gainwell was taking the bulk of the snaps, bulk of the carries, a lot of pass catching work. I mean, he was just a full-on workhorse by the end of the season for the Steelers. So if Bucky does have to miss time, I'm not worried about Kenneth Gainwell, shying away from anything. I think he's going to step into that role very well. At number 36, I have Kyle Monangai from the Chicago Bears. Last year, I thought he was very good. He ended up making the running back room pretty split committee. It was like one drive for DeAndre Swift, one drive for Kyle Monangai, and then back to DeAndre Swift, and vice versa for pretty much the whole game. This year, his line's at 625 yards, and even 4.5 touchdowns is that line. So that's pretty solid for, RB37 player. His ADP right now is 93. I think that, he is just an overall really solid player, and if it's going to be anything like last year, he's a guy that can split carries with DeAndre Swift all season. And then, if DeAndre Swift goes down, he's going to be a league winner. And that's plain and simple. They trust Kyle Monangai in this offense, as we saw last year, just eating away at carries from DeAndre Swift. And I think, he showed last year that he's worth it. 783 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 164 yards through the air, which isn't horrible, but nothing like a true pass catcher. But I think that, Kyle Monangai in this offense, if they're going to take a step forward again, I think it comes with, these two running backs, Swift and Monangai, going head first, really stepping up into the next role. Also could see a situation play out where, they get inside the 10 or the 5-yard line and, they bring in Kyle Monangai for those goal line carries. What we saw last year, I feel like they were favoring him more in the red zone than DeAndre Swift, actually. Moving into running back 35, we have Blake Corum from the Los Angeles Rams. Last year, he put up 750 yards, 6 touchdowns on the ground, not anything through the air, not really much of a factor in that part. His ADP right now is 99th. That's going in the early 9th round, and his line is at 675 with 5.5 rushing touchdowns. I think that, it's pretty fairly set out for him. He last year was a split carry backfield with Kyron. A lot of the drives, like same with Kyle Monangai and DeAndre Swift, a lot of the drives were pretty much the same with Blake Corum and Kyron Williams, where one would get one drive, the other would get the next, and vice versa for the rest of the game. And I also just think Blake Corum is just a pretty explosive player. We saw all throughout his career at Michigan, he could break off runs from any part of the field. And they have a great line out there in Los Angeles. So it's going to be on a good offense. I expect him, to be in the red zone a lot, just depending on if he's on the field and getting those touches. That's the key for him. At running back 34, we have Aaron Jones with the Minnesota Vikings. Last season was pretty disappointing for him. He only appeared in 12 games, about 550 yards, 2 touchdowns. Did have 28 receptions for 200 yards and a touchdown. So that's not horrible, but overall he was just pretty injured last year. I think the age is getting to him a little bit, and the quarterback play last year was atrocious. So that really killed it when he was playing. But this year they get Kyler Murray. I think that's definitely going to be a step up and a foot in the right direction for sure. And I think, that Vegas is kind of shorting him on his yards a little bit. They only have him at 600 yards. Maybe they think it's going to be a split backfield. I kind of agree, but I don't also think that, Aaron Jones has still got something left in the tank if he can stay healthy this season. 600 yards is probably a little low for me. I was guessing more about the 750 to 800 yard line. I guess Jordan Mason could be a factor this year, eating into his carries just with the age and if he stays healthy and everything. But I overall, I just think, being in the KOC offense, getting better quarterback play, I think that's really just going to elevate this team in general, and I think Aaron Jones can be a beneficiary to that. Running back 33, I have Chuba Hubbard with the Carolina Panthers. We talked a little bit about him earlier with Jonathan Brooks. Vegas has him at 800 yards, 4.5 touchdowns. I think that's pretty fair because last year he was in a committee with Rico Dowdle. Now I think, at first it's probably going to be him as the lead back, especially to start the season, but I could see Jonathan Brooks eating into his carries, over time passes on, they may end up in a split committee, just kind of like last year. And he went down with injury, and Rico took advantage of his opportunity. So if Jonathan Brooks gets on the field and he takes advantage of his opportunity just like Rico did, we could see the same thing as last year, split backfield. So it's cautious for me to want to have Chuba on my fantasy team this year. His ADP right now is 68th going in the 6th round. I think that's still even a little early for me. But if you're desperate at running back, I could see definitely taking a swing on him. But just because we don't really know what Jonathan Brooks, could be after 2 ACL tears. But as of right now, I think that Chuba Hubbard is a little concerning. And the Panthers aren't going to be the greatest offense in the world anyway. So it's a little cautious for me. At running back 32, I have RJ Harvey with the Denver Broncos. While he had a pretty productive first rookie season last year, getting 540 yards through the ground, 7 touchdowns on the ground, and 350 yards through the air, and 5 touchdowns through the air as well. That's a pretty productive first year, but you got to think about it from the big picture. J.K. Dobbins did get hurt, and that really kind of just let him grow into the role that he was in. And now they bring J.K. Dobbins back again, even after injury, for another 2-year contract. So that does put a little damper on R.J. Harvey as a whole. Not to mention, they also draft a 4th-round running back, Jonah Coleman, who, he and R.J. Harvey might be fighting for touches, in every game. So it's hard to say really how good R.J. Harvey is going to be, because we don't know what's going to happen with Jonah Coleman as well and how this offense is going to run, but I think it's going to look very similar to last year, where J.K. Dobbins was the lead back, R.J. Harvey really only in on passing downs, and when they need, a big explosive play like 2-minute drills, passing downs, long third downs, instances like that. Not to mention, when R.J. Harvey did get the chance, to grow into that role when J.K. Dobbins got hurt, he was pretty bad running. He was, rushing yard per attempt, pretty bad. Yards per carry was like 7th worst. Yards after contact, 8th worst. Explosive run rate, 9th worst. Only averaging 3.6 yards per carry, which is pretty bad. So overall, he's not a very good runner. I think he lacks a lot of vision. And I think J.K. Dobbins is still going to just be the lead back in this offense. So it's very, very interesting to look at R.J. Harvey this year compared to what we saw last year. At RB31, I have Rico Dowdle going from the Carolina Panthers to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think this is a pretty good move for the Steelers to get Rico Dowdle after seeing Kenneth Gainwell leave. His lines right now is at 750 yards, 4.5 touchdowns. I think that's pretty fair. This offense, I think with Mike McCarthy, is going to be a more air attack offense. Yes, they're obviously going to still establish the run, but I think Jaylen Warren has really, gained trust from this organization as a whole that, he is capable of being the lead back. And I think it's really going to be a split committee, honestly. I think, it's going to be one drive Warren, one drive Dowdle. And if they both stay healthy the whole season, I think that's how it's going to play out. And even when, Dowdle did eclipse 1,000 yards the past 2 seasons, I still just think, Warren's earned his spot. And Dowdle, he's still got a lot to prove, coming from team to team. And this is a whole new coaching staff in Pittsburgh, but there's not too much upside as of right now for him in this offense, just being on the Steelers alone. Mike McCarthy is very known for being a pass-heavy offense. Him and Aaron Rodgers are going to be on point with that. So it'll be interesting to see, but nothing really is jumping off the page at me from the Steelers run game this year. Kind of looking over at Jaylen Warren, I actually have him ranked right above him at running back 30. Like I said, probably going to be a split committee, and I think Jaylen Warren has earned the trust from this organization just as a whole that he can, be the lead back. And Vegas doesn't really have his line at that. They only have his line at 600. So maybe they think, Rico Dowdle is going to be the lead back. As a Steelers fan alone, I don't see that happening. I think, if anything, it's going to be a split committee, but I could, probably see Jaylen Warren probably at least starting the season, weeks 1 through 6, probably, 60% of the snaps, and then, as the season goes on, it might get more of a 50-50 split. And Jaylen Warren was pretty close to that 1,000-yard mark last year at 958 yards. He's also a great pass catcher out of the backfield. So very athletic. I think, the Steelers got themselves a gem here, and I'm excited to watch them both play. Not for fantasy football more likely, but just watching football. I think they complement each other very well. Explosiveness, bruiser, elusiveness, and in actual football world versus just fantasy football. Fantasy football is like, I don't really, want part of the running game here, but just football in general, I am excited for Warren and Dowdle to be, a tandem in the backfield. Coming in at RB29, we have J.K. Dobbins with the Denver Broncos. Kind of touched on him a little bit with R.J. Harvey, but his Vegas line is at 700 yards, 5.5 touchdowns. Last year, he appeared in only 10 games. He did have a season-ending injury. I think that, them re-signing him for 2 years and a good amount of money, I think that shows how much trust they have in Dobbins, and, that he can still get the job done, even with, R.J. Harvey and Jonah Coleman being behind him. I still think that they trust J.K. Dobbins a lot. And this offense will still be pretty good. Sean Payton runs a pretty good offense. They got Bo Nix, Jalen Waddle, Sutton. Still a pretty good offense on a good team. And they do have a pretty tough schedule. A lot of opponents that, defenses are going to be pretty hard to go against. And I think that, if Dobbins is going to be the lead back, someone's got to score the touchdowns, someone's got to get the points, and I just think he's going to be, getting the bulk of the carries, so it'll probably be him. At running back 28, I have Ramondre Stevenson with the New England Patriots. His Vegas lines is 625 yards and 6.5 touchdowns. If you actually look at the stats last year, Ramondre was actually pretty much better in all aspects of the game versus Travion Henderson. I just think that, the fumble issues, and he's not really a high ceiling player. That's why I have him at this ranking. He's actually one spot behind Travion. I have Travion at 27. But really, in general, I think it's going to end up being a split backfield. And there aren't a lot of offenses where we see, one guy just fully take over. There's always, someone like 65-35 split or 60-40 split, or, it's very rare we get the 70-30s or, 75-25 splits anymore. But I do think, Ramondre is going to probably be the lead back again, just like last season. If he, can maybe handle the fumble issues, he should see the field, his regular amount. Sometimes last year he would get benched every once in a while when he would fumble and just be, the way he is. But overall, he doesn't excite me too much. He's just a solid floor play. But moving over to the counterpart, Travion Henderson, I have him at running back 27. With Travion Henderson, pretty much last year, he struggled with pass blocking, and just overall, he wasn't as good as Ramondre Stevenson. The numbers showed that, PFF grades showed that, and, I think that he's a very explosive player. He's got the highest ceiling probably of any running back in the league, and this offense is going to be probably very good, but I just can't see him, being in a full bell cow workload with this Patriots offense. Josh McDaniels has always had a committee running back system, and I think it's going to continue that way this year. His line in Vegas is 700 yards and 6.5 touchdowns. So, very similar to Ramondre in that aspect. I just think that, Travion has the higher ceiling. We could see him pop off, for 4 or 5 games, start getting more and more into the role of the bell cow. But I just can't really see, him fully taking over that role. I could maybe see, a 60-40 split where Travion is on the 60% side. But I do really love him. He's very explosive. He's one of the most exciting players to watch in the league. He's going right now in the 5th round of drafts. So it's a little pricey, but I like Travion. He's just explosive. But there is a lot of work there to be done. At running back 26, I have Tony Pollard with the Tennessee Titans. Last year, he did eclipse that 1,000-yard mark. It was kind of like a very quiet season for him, honestly. Really, the past 2 seasons have been very quiet. Still reaching 1,000 yards in the past 4 seasons, but really just super quiet past 2 years. This year, his Vegas line is at 800 with 5.5 rushing touchdowns, which I think is pretty fair. He's going to be the lead back in Tennessee. Tajay Spears is behind him, but I wouldn't say he's a non-factor. I just think that if Tony Pollard stays healthy, it's going to be Tony Pollard's backfield. But this offense and this team in general is probably not going to be the best, and that's why I have him ranked at this spot at running back 26. That's on that fringe RB2, a high-end RB3 rank, possibly a good flex play, just depending on the week. But the thing about Tony Pollard is he's consistent. And last year there was a point where, we all wrote him off. He wasn't getting 1,000 yards, blah, 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 blah. And he did. I think he's just a consistent running back. If he stays healthy, he can just be there, take carries, and just be, the guy he is pretty much year in and year out, just consistency. Running back 25, I have David Montgomery of the Houston Texans. Now he just got traded from the Detroit Lions. His Vegas line is at 775 with 5.5 rushing touchdowns. Coming from Detroit, I think is, probably a good move for him because they were, really leaning into Jahmyr Gibbs last year, but he gets a fresh start. I think that he will definitely be the lead back early down role in this offense. But we can't write off Woody Marks. Like I said earlier, he's definitely going to have himself carved out a role. It's just a matter of, whether that split is going to be, 65-35, 70-30, 60-40. It's hard to say, but I do like David Montgomery. He is, not a full, like I love him, but I think he's just, going to be a pretty solid, reliable running back this year. He is getting a little older, which is, playing into the lines and, where we have him ranked now. But if this offensive line can figure it out for these running backs, I think it could still be a pretty good opportunity to take David Montgomery in this year's drafts. Running back 24, I have Bashaw Tutin of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now with Travis Etienne leaving the Jaguars, this opens the door for Tutin to explode. I really like Tutin this year. He's going to be in a great environment in Jacksonville. Last year they had a lot of rushing touchdowns on the ground, and I think Tutin is going to be the guy this year that we are going to be so excited to watch this year. His Vegas line is only at 725 and 5.5 touchdowns. I think the yards is pretty low. They really don't have any other running backs in this room that I'm too worried about. They have Tutin, LaQuint Allen, I think is his name, and Chris Rodriguez coming from the Commanders, but I don't see Chris Rodriguez or Allen, taking into his role any at all. I think it's pretty much, going to probably be a 65-35 split, possibly even 70-30, and that's going to be really good for Tutin and just this offense in general. He's explosive. He's super fast. He ran a 4.3, I believe, at the combine. So I am excited to watch this Jaguars, offense explode. I like Liam Cohen a lot, and I think Bashaw Tutin is going to be a huge beneficiary of just being on a good offense and a good team. Next up, running back 23, we have Jadarian Price. This is an interesting one. I think, with the injury to Zach Charbonnet, they didn't really bring in anyone else. Kenneth Walker is gone. Jadarian Price is set up to be the premier running back of this offense, at least probably for the first 7-8 weeks. I mean, Charbonnet may not come back until like November, possibly even like December, if I had to say. I think this sets up Jadarian Price extremely well. Going to be on a good team. I don't think the offense is going to be as good as they were, last year, just with Clint Kubiak leaving, but I don't think they're going to take, too many steps back to where it just hinders everything. But I like Jadarian Price this season. His Vegas line's at 750 yards, 5.5 touchdowns. He is just intriguing because he's going to be on a good offense. He is a rookie. and there's no other really running backs in that room for him to compete with, at least right now. When Charbonnet comes back, which might be a factor, that could take away from his opportunities. But it is interesting to look at Price, and you may have a league winner on your hands here in the RB20s. So I have him ranked here at RB23, but he has some pretty good upside just for the fact that he's going to be on a good team and a good offense probably, and he's going to be probably the lead back for the first 7-8 weeks. Next up at running back 22, we have DeAndre Swift. He is a very reliable running back in this entire league. Ben Johnson is a great coach with an amazing run scheme, and they just overpowered teams with their run game last year. We saw them on, I think it was the Black Friday game. They ran it down the Philadelphia Eagles' throat for like 400 yards. I love watching teams do that, and it's fun to watch when that happens. But DeAndre Swift, coming off one of his best seasons of his career, topping in rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, fantasy points. He even missed a game and still did all of that. His line this year is coming in at 800 yards, 7.5 rushing touchdowns. I think just being in this scheme and attached to a Ben Johnson offense is huge for him. I think that it's still probably going to be a committee, but I think he's got an incredibly safe floor. If he's healthy this whole season, I think he's just going to be a consistent RB2 for you. Very straightforward of what you're getting. You don't have to guess about how is he going to do this week, how is he going to do the next week. It's going to be straightforward consistency the whole entire season. It probably will be a split backfield, but it may not even matter just because their run scheme is going to be probably so effective. They did lose an offensive lineman to retirement recently, though. So if their offensive line can, be as good as they were last year, or even, not take a huge fall off, I think that DeAndre Swift can exploit this running game and, just have a great season again. And at running back 21, we have Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. Last year was a really weird and odd situation he was in. He was dealing with some legal stuff, going into the season. And even when he got, back to playing, it was a little bit of a ramp up, and then he kind of finally, exploded on the scene. He was very good for when he was in the game. He finished with 827 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, and even pretty effective in the pass game, 26 catches for 171. And then at the end of the season, when he got hurt, that was, the end of his season. He ended up, fracturing his fibula and had surgery on it. So there is an injury risk going into year 2 for Quinshon Judkins. And he's just not on a offense that I really want to be a part of. It's not a full fade for me, but it's more of just a situation that I don't want to be attached to. The Browns, they're going to be losing a lot of games. They're going to have to throw a lot. Yes, it was pretty much the same last year, but last year they relied on the run just because they were playing a little more close in games. And if they do that again this year, yeah, we might see Quinshon Judkins, get a lot of carries. But with just being attached to this offense, it doesn't excite me at all. He's a great player, kind of really just stuck in a bad situation with the Cleveland Browns. Moving into running back 20, we have Travis Etienne, or HN, I guess is how you're supposed to say it. His Vegas line is at 875.5. Rushing touchdowns is at 5.5. So he comes from Jacksonville, goes to the New Orleans Saints in this offseason. I'm not opposed to it. I think the Saints is going to be a pretty sneaky team this year. Kellen Moore is going to run a lot of plays, going to have, Etienne on the field for a lot of them. I think that Etienne's probably going to be, the early down and lead back with Kamara coming in when, Etienne needs a break. And I think Kamara is a little washed in my opinion, but I do see Kamara having some sort of a role in this offense. And right now, Travis Etienne is going at 33rd in ADP, which is in the late third round. So it is a little pricey to get him, but I think that him being in New Orleans doesn't really set him back too much after a great season last year in Jacksonville. Obviously, if he was running it back in Jacksonville, I would be more intrigued, but him going over to the Saints in a new system and a new offense, it's not the end of the world for me. It's just something different that it kind of, could hinder something coming up in the future, in his play. At running back 19, I have Bucky Irving with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He was a pretty frustrating player last season just because he was, playing through injury. The first 4 weeks, he was amazing, good stuff from Bucky. But as soon as he got hurt and tried to come back, that was just not smart and not the most logical thing to do. He was terrible, to say the least. He had the shoulder injury that hindered his play a lot. He couldn't pass block, he couldn't catch, he could barely take hits. And not only that, it's just he's going into a situation this year now where Rachaad White leaves. They signed Kenny Gainwell, that's going to be the passing down back, 2-minute drills probably in that role. And then they also still have Sean Tucker, who's probably going to get a lot of the goal line carries. They like using him at the goal line. I believe he led the team last year in goal line carries inside the 5. So there is a cap to, I would say, Bucky Irving's ceiling for this upcoming season. And if Bucky is, on time with his health, everything's good to go, and he is the same player he was his rookie season, I think Bucky is going to be an amazing pickup. It's just a matter of how big is Kenny Gainwell's, role going to be? Is Sean Tucker really going to take all the goal line carries again? So we'll have to see about that. It's just, you have to be on the lookout for this Tampa Bay offense running game, whether that's going to be Bucky Irving's healthy and ready to go, or if he is healthy, how much role is he actually going to be able to produce? So it'll be interesting to see. His line right now is at 825 and 5.5 touchdowns. And I hope that he gets back to his rookie year form. But it's a concerning situation that we have brewing down in Tampa Bay for him. Running back 18, I have Breece Hall with the New York Jets. His line for rushing yards is at 900 with 5.5 rushing touchdowns. His reception line is actually even out too at 325.5. That just goes to show he's a pretty good receiving back out of the backfield. Past 3 seasons, he's caught 36 balls, 57, 76. So he is going to be a huge factor in the pass game of this Jets offense, which I really like. The situation, isn't great. I don't think the Jets are going to be, a very good team, or, that they have a lot to play for, because they're not going to be very good. But I think Breece Hall is going to be really the only running back in this offense that is going to be able to do a whole lot. I think he's going to get a lot of the bulk carries. I think Braylon Allen may, try to eat at his role a little bit. I can't really see a world where Braylon Allen is so good that he eats into, the split and causes it to be a 50-50 split. I think Breece Hall is good enough to where he's going to fend him off and at least make it, 60-40. And hopefully never get to that 50-50 split. Up next, I have Kyren Williams with the Los Angeles Rams. Kind of touched on him a little bit earlier with Blake Corum. This is a guy who's in a very good offense, very good system, but he does have a split backfield potentially. Again, with Blake Corum, his line right now is at 1,000 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. This just goes to show that being on a good offense is going to get you more rushing touchdowns. And last year, he still eclipsed 1,200 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns, even was a factor in the pass game, getting 3 touchdowns through the air with that and 281 yards on 36 catches. And every season he's played, he's gotten 30 catches. So he is a factor in the pass game as well, which is nice. The thing is that if Blake Corum, is still going to be splitting this role, I can't see like a super high ceiling for Kyren Williams. I see him as a pretty safe floor. And in fantasy football, if we're going with safe floor, for our whole team, that's not going to win us championships. We need, good players that have a high ceiling and that could explode on fantasy football. But Kyron Williams, I just don't think he has the upside to explode like that anymore with Blake Corum, being in his backfield. Running back 16 is Cam Scatterbo of the New York Giants. I really am starting to love Cam Scatterbo this season. He has a clear path for some upside to be a top running back this season. He's got 3-down ability, great pass catcher, great runner. He's just super tough and hard-headed, and I love him. I love watching him play, and there's nothing better than having a player on your team that you just like to watch play too, because that's what football really is about, is just actually enjoying the game and watching who you want to root for. And I am a rooter for Cam Scatterbo. Before he got hurt last season, he was getting all the carries inside the 5, a lot of the pass catching work, a lot of the early down work. He was just, going off pretty much as soon as, he was healthy, and when he was, playing last season. But there is pretty big concern with his ankle injury. He had the, dislocation that actually I think broke skin, so they had to do like an emergency surgery for him. And it is a pretty risky thing to take on for this season. But he has been practicing as of this summer, seen doing backflips or something of those sorts. But I think he's got a lot of upside. If this offense is going to be any good, I think Cam Scatterbo is going to be a big beneficiary of that. They get John Harbaugh. They invest a little bit into the O-line drafting this year. They drafted Francis Maioga at the 10th overall pick from Miami. They bring over Isaiah Likely, John Harbaugh, like I mentioned. And John Harbaugh is going to want to run the ball. They look at Derrick Henry, look at Ravens teams in the past, Mark Ingram, Ray Rice. Like, they want to run the ball. I think Cam Scatterbo is going to be a pretty solid player this year with some good upside. At running back 15, I have Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. And now I know he's dealing with some legal stuff, and they have said, business as usual. I'm still, a little concerned. We don't exactly know 100% yet what happened or, what is going to happen. But just looking at it from a fantasy perspective, I have him ranked at this rank mostly because of that concerning situation off the field. But if he was, fully, nothing's going on with him off the field, he'd probably be a higher rank. But right now I have him at 15. His Vegas line is at 975 for rushing yards, 11.5 touchdowns, and even 275 receiving yards, which is pretty good to see. And the 11.5 touchdowns is a lot. And I know that I said earlier, it's good to be on a great team and a great offense because, rushing touchdowns are going to be a big factor of that. And I'm going to stand on that because Josh Jacobs, he just gets touchdowns because he's on a great team. I mean, look at 2025. He didn't even eclipse 1,000 yards, but he had 13 rushing touchdowns. And the season before that, 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns on the ground. So it's just being on a great team like this, I think, has its huge beneficiaries. And if this stuff off the field can get cleaned up, I think Josh Jacobs, can do another season like that where he gets, 10, 11, 12, 13 touchdowns on the ground and probably even, a better rushing yard season than he had last year. But, things happen. We'll see what happens with him. Just a little concerning with the off the field issues. At number 14, I have Javonte Williams of the Dallas Cowboys. His Vegas line is at 1,000. 9.5 rushing touchdowns, 225 receiving yards. Going to be on a great offense, going to be on a great team. I expect him, be the workhorse back in this offense. And like I've been saying kind of this whole video is if you're on a good team, you're going to get a lot of opportunities to score a lot of rushing touchdowns. And that's what Javonte took advantage of last year. And I hope, it folds out the same way this year. It's just the offense is going to be high-powered, high-motored. If everybody can stay healthy, they're going to be, one of the best offenses in the league, probably the best offense in the league. And if they get down inside the 5, inside, the 10, Javonte Williams is going to be a good target for Dak Prescott and this offense to use on the ground. And if they need to, he can catch passes out of the backfield as well. Last year, he had 35 catches. The year before that, 52. So he's pretty good receiving back. And I like Javonte just as a safe floor play. His ceiling may not be the highest just because they have, CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, a lot of mouths to feed on this offense. But if they're going to get inside the 5 and use Javonte like they did last year, I think that's a huge win for Javonte. Going into running back 13, we have Jeremiah Love with the Arizona Cardinals. To sum it up, pretty much, he is a world-class talent, an amazing running back prospect that is in a pretty, sucky situation. The Cardinals, they're going to be losing a lot of games. They're going to have to throw the ball. I think that's where Jeremiah Love's upside, is in the pass game. Jeremiah Love, he's gonna get on the field. 3rd overall pick, a ton of money put towards him. He's gonna be on the field. They do have Tyler Algier. They do have James Conner, Trey Benson, but he probably won't even be a factor. But there is, a world where Conner and Algier and Love, they all split carries, which I think is probably pretty realistic, at least for like the first half of the season. But I think, the passing downs, the 2-minute drills, late in the game when they're losing and they need to try to make a comeback, Jeremiah Love is going to be on the field for probably, I would say 80 to 85% of those, plays, which is going to be a lot of the game because they're not going to be very good. And he's just a super athletic player and explosive that, if they put this much toward him in draft capital, they have to use him. And I don't think there's any world where, he is, quote unquote, the running back 2 or 3 in this offense. I think he's probably going to be the one, going to be, using the pass game a lot for screens, designed run scheme plays. And his lines are even showing that 900 yards, 5.5 rushing touchdowns. So we'll see where that lands him actually. But I think that there's a lot of upside just, with Jeremiah Love potentially this season. At running back 12, I have Kenneth Walker on the Kansas City Chiefs now. He comes from the Seattle Seahawks to the Chiefs, Super Bowl MVP, all the glory coming off the Super Bowl win. He had a pretty solid season last year, eclipsing 1,000 yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, some pass catch work out of the backfield. But the story really is that how are they going to use him in Kansas City? And I think the answer is they're going to use him a lot. They really haven't had a super prominent run game in Kansas City, and I think that Andy Reid knows that, and he's going to want to change it. That's why they brought over Kenneth Walker. He's got the 3-down skill set that they're going to use a lot. His Vegas line's 925, rushing touchdown 7.5, and receiving yards 300. So he's going to get a lot of opportunities, in the red zone to score a lot of touchdowns on the ground and through the air. And just being attached to Patrick Mahomes is a huge plus for him. I just think that, if Kenneth Walker is going to be, good this year, he's going to be good in this offense just because no Charbonnet to, take carries away from him. I think that the only guy behind him is probably going to be like Kareem Hunt or Brashad Smith. And I think those are kind of like nothing burgers now, in my opinion. But I think if this Chiefs offense is going to be good again, they got Eric Bieniemy back. No more Matt Nagy, I think his name is. I think Kenneth Walker is going to be a beneficiary to hopefully a good Chiefs offense again. Running back 11 is Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. He actually just got an extension recently. His Vegas line's at 1,000 rushing yards, 5.5 rushing touchdowns, 425 receiving yards. Really, the story with him is that there's no more Tua, there's no more Mike McDaniel, no more Waddle, no more Tyreek probably. He is really the only person in this offense that is capable of doing anything. I think teams are going to, factor in on him. They're going to be looking for him everywhere he goes. He's going to be, the shining light on the field that the defense is just looking for because no one else is going to be able to do anything on this team. Malik Willis is the quarterback now. We'll see how that quarterback play ends up. I just think that, being on a super bad team like the Miami Dolphins are going to be this year, it's just not a great situation that I want to be involved with. I just also think that Devon Achane is just a super athletic and explosive player that they have to feed him. So he's going to get a lot of opportunities, a lot of catches, a lot of carries. So that's why I have him ranked at this spot. It's just, I just don't see him, getting the ceiling like he once had with, Mike McDaniel and that offense that they've had in the past. Now, to kind of run through this top 10 pretty quick, at number 10, I have Omarion Hampton. I think that with the Mike McDaniel going to the Los Angeles Chargers now, that's a huge win for Omarion Hampton and this Charger team as a whole. He is a very talented running back. His line is at 925 with 7.5 rushing touchdowns. I think this Chargers offense is going to be pretty good this year. They go in free agency, sign 2 offensive linemen. They even draft somebody in the 2nd round and the 4th round to get this offensive line back on track. Last year, their offensive line was super injured. So if they can bounce back this season, I think Omarion Hampton is going to be what he was supposed to be last year. He's an incredible athlete. And I think he has got the capability of huge upside in being an RB1 this season, especially with Mike McDaniel. I think him and Mike McDaniel are going to be great together. And I like this way that the Chargers are going, being in a really good offense in a tough division. So it's going to be interesting to see, but I like Omarion Hampton this year. Number 9 is Derrick Henry. Not really too much to say about Derrick Henry. I really have him ranked at this spot just because of age. And I don't know when it's really going to catch up to him. He's down for 1,250 yards this year, 12.5 rushing touchdowns. Can pop off any time of any game, really. So it's a little interesting to rank him. And as we saw last year, he had 16 rushing touchdowns, 1,600 yards basically. So not very much pass catching work, so that limits him a little bit, but if age is going to catch up to him, I would say it's probably coming soon. That's why I have him ranked at this spot. It's really nothing more than that. I also think that, with the turnover of the new coaching staff, new offensive coordinator, things might not be on the same page right away. So it could take some time to gel with this new offense. So I have him ranked at number 9. And it'll be interesting to see how he plays out this year. I don't love him. I don't hate him. Just kind of in the middle for me right now. At number 8, I have Ashton Jeanty. I think he is in for a huge bounce back season this year. Last year, his offensive line and just offense in general was horrid to watch. He was really the only player out there that was helping, the offense try to win a game. Brock Bowers was hurt most of this season. And terrible quarterback play, terrible offensive scheme, terrible coaching, terrible offensive line. It was a mass of factors that really limited him last season. He was getting hit behind the line every single play. I think that, this year they invested in some offensive line. They got Linderbaum from the Ravens. They even drafted somebody in the 3rd round. They got Fernando Mendoza. They got Brock Bowers coming back healthy. They got head coach Clint Kubiak, who is amazing. I love Clint Kubiak. And, he made the most of his opportunities last year. 975 yards, 5 touchdowns, 346 through the air, another 5 touchdowns through the air. So, it was pretty disappointing from the box score standpoint, but I think this year is going to be kind of like a flip the script year for him, honestly. New offensive, scheme, new quarterback, partially new line. Brock Bowers is coming back healthy. I just think that, the situation got a little bit better in Las Vegas for this team. And Ashton Jeanty is too good of a player to, do the same thing again. I think he is, in for a pretty high ceiling year this year. So I like Ashton Jeanty. It's going to be pretty hard to pass up on him. At number 7, I have Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. This is a guy who's going to be in a great offense, high power this year. 825 projected yards on the ground, 6 rushing touchdowns on the ground. He last year, kind of had a little bit of a disappointing rushing season standpoint, only 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. But he caught 69 passes through the air for 437 yards, 5 touchdowns through the air. That's his bread and butter right there. If they're going to throw him the ball, he's going to make plays. He's a playmaker out of the backfield, great pass catcher. And I think the running is going to get better with the offensive line play this year. That I think that, they drafted an offensive lineman that, could pan out for them. They could gel a little bit more. I don't think they're going to be the worst in the league offensive line ranks. So that's only going to benefit Chase Brown. And, this team and as a whole, they should have a very good offense. So he's going to be a beneficiary of that once they get inside the 10 and the 5-yard line. At ranking number 6, I have Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. His line right now is 1,100 yards, 7.5 touchdowns, 250 yards through the air. That's projected for him. They go out and get Mekhi Lemon in the draft. A.J. Brown leaves. They get a new offensive coordinator. So a lot of things moving in Philly, which could be good for Saquon. You know, they may go back to just pounding the rock and relying on the run this upcoming season. Offensive line coach of, I think, the past like 13 or 14, 15 years left. He's no longer a coach with the Eagles anymore. So that is, you know, possibly a little bit concerning about this offensive line. They are getting a little bit older. Lane Johnson, Mailata, they're getting older. And if they, you know, if the offensive line can stay healthy, unlike last season, you know, Saquon can go back to his form of, you know, being a takeover monster throughout the league. And I am interested to see how the Eagles, you know, gel this year with, you know, all the new changes and everything. But Saquon's just a great talent, going to be on a pretty good team. So his rushing, you know, upside is there. It's just a matter of, are the Eagles going to be able to support him and, you know, uplift this team to some touchdowns for him. At ranking number 5, I have Jonathan Taylor. You know, his line is at 1,250.5, rushing touchdowns of 11.5 touchdowns. He was amazing last year until Daniel Jones got hurt. Once Daniel Jones got hurt, it was pretty much just all downhill from there. And even still, he played all 17 games last year, almost got 1,600 yards, had 18 rushing touchdowns, even through the air, 46 catches, 378 yards, 2 touchdowns. Pretty much an amazing season last year. It was just a matter of when Daniel Jones got hurt, the offense just started to go downhill really fast. So if Daniel Jones is back, you know, to his old self, I think this offense, you know, can still be what it was last year before he got hurt. His mobility is going to be a little limited, but I think, you know, with him just being back in the offense, it's going to be huge for Jonathan Taylor. And I think Jonathan Taylor is just a really good talent, really explosive player, great rusher. There's not really much else to say. It's just a matter of if Daniel Jones can command this offense again and hopefully, you know, be back to his prior self. Number 4, I have James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. He is going to be the main attraction, really, probably in this offense, coming in with 12.25 rushing projection and 10.5 rushing projection. It's pretty simple. They love James Cook. They love using him pretty much anywhere on the field. Joe Brady loves him, and now Joe Brady is the head coach of this team. He's been getting, you know, more carries over his career. Last year, he first time eclipsed 300 rushing attempts. I think it's even going to go up more this year. Probably we'll see in the 330s, I would say. And for James Cook, he's a great athlete out of the pass, in the pass game. They haven't really used him much in the pass game, but I think that, you know, with Joe Brady loving James Cook so much and seeing how great of an athlete he is, they're going to use him a lot more out of the backfield and just in the pass game in general. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but he's going to be on a great offense. They're going to score a lot of touchdowns. Josh Allen is, you know, superhero Josh Allen. If he can, you know, do what he does and James Cook can just explode, they're going to be pretty hard to stop. At number 3, we have Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. Coming off of a outstanding season last year where, you know, he was healthy for the whole year, super involved in the running game, super involved in the passing game, super clear upside that he is, you know, running back 1 last year. This offense Kyle Shanahan runs is just amazing to watch, and this year Vegas, you know, pretty much has that mapped out for him. They have him at 950 yards, 8.5 rushing touchdowns, and almost 600 receiving yards for this upcoming season. If, you know, the whole McCaffrey thing is really, if he stays healthy, he's RB1. If he's not healthy, he's a nothing burger. So I really love McCaffrey. I really hope he stays healthy. You know, I want him on my teams. It's just the fact of the matter is, can he stay healthy? That's really all it is. They bring in Mike Evans, Christian Kirk. You know, they draft a running back, but he's not going to, you know, do anything to Christian McCaffrey's workload or anything. I'm not concerned with that. It's really just, if McCaffrey stays healthy, this Kyle Shanahan offense is going to be amazing. It's going to funnel through him. He's the heart and soul of this offense. So I love McCaffrey. I'm just hoping and praying he can stay healthy this season. Running back 2, I have Bijan Robinson, coming off of one of his best seasons, where he only really scored 11 touchdowns, which it's like, yeah, he scored 11 touchdowns, but he's on a bad team. If this Falcons offense can take a step up with, new offensive coordinator and head coach, that I mean, this team could, make some moves. Last year he was, really awesome in the running game, really awesome in the passing game, just overall, just super awesome. I think that, there's not really much to say about Bijan. Just, we know who he is. We know how great he can be. It's just a matter of how good this offense can help him, get to that ceiling. He has a super high ceiling. We know he's going to catch 60, 70, 80 balls out of the backfield and run for 1,300 yards. It's just a matter of, can this team get him, near the red zone, get him in the end zone, get those rushing touchdowns, even out of the backfield, catching passing touchdowns. That's huge for him. So I really love Bijan this year. And another guy I really love is my number 1 overall running back, Jahmyr Gibbs. He's just an electric factory. Now that David Montgomery's gone, he's, going to be the 80% snap share back. There's nothing really else to say. You have all watched it on tape already. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's coming off monster seasons. Last year, he had, I believe, 18 total touchdowns, which you might say, there's going to be some, touchdown regression. I would disagree. The offense is going to be, the continuity on this offense is just too good to, over analyze it, really. The touchdown regressions, could be there, or maybe he scores 16 touchdowns or 15 touchdowns, but that's still, some RB1 numbers. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is just the electricity factory that we all want on this team. They do have a new offensive coordinator, so hopefully they figure it out this summer, get everything gelled up, and he is all good to go this season. But that's pretty much it for this video. I just went through the top 40 running backs that I ranked and how I feel about them. I probably will do this for, a certain amount of wide receivers. I'm not sure how many yet, maybe 40 or 50, but we shall see. If you guys like this video and stayed this whole time, make sure you leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Now that fantasy season's kind of ramping up, I'm hoping to get out more and more videos, really sit down and take some time to look and dive deep into this. But hopefully you guys enjoyed. Peace.